So you're thinking about containers. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Geos team. We have Stephen Akufo, we have Todd Day, we have Martin Hayes, we have Curtis Edwards, and myself, Nick Rubin. We're here to talk about containers, why containers. Last video, we talked about sizing and what things do we need to consider when we start talking about containers, involving containers in our sizing process. But today, we're really going to kind of jump into the business value of containers. And we have Todd Day, our resident Geos team container expert, who is going to be answering a lot of questions for us and helping us understand what we have to think about outside of sizing when we talk about containers. So Todd, our first question for you today is, what does it mean for our customers when they consider containers? We talked about the sizing side, but we know that sizing is a very different conversation. So what do we need to consider when we start talking about containers with our customers?
Right. Yeah. Usually, thanks for having me on, guys. One of the things that, so I spend a lot of time talking with account teams, customers, et cetera, that are going down this path. And usually the things that I like to think about is, well, who are we talking to in terms of the customer side? Are we talking to developers? Are we talking to IT? And what do we know about their particular use case for containers? Is it motivated by some sort of business process problem that they're trying to solve, or is it something that they're looking for a reason for? Because if they have a clear idea from a cloud native 12-factor application development perspective that, hey, we're going down this path, we're modernizing these applications into microservices, et cetera, and we're building a cloud native application that's going to leverage containers and leverage what the public cloud or private cloud have to offer, then it's a different starting point in the conversation than if I'm talking to corp IT and they're saying, well, we want to be ready and we're starting to think about this. That's a good place to start when operations and IT are thinking about how they're going to approach it. And those are the type of conversations that go into a bit of a different direction. So I usually like to start there.
Todd, right? Like you kind of mentioned like that dev experience that they might want to build the application in a particular way versus IT who might not have the same, let's call them mental models on how their IT operations should work. So I guess one of the first questions a lot of people have is that, does IT need to have a deep understanding of this 12-factor model, how developers want to do to start having a conversation about containerization? Or
I don't think that I wouldn't say a deep. So a developer has a very deep and intimate relationship with 12-factor application methodologies, right? But the IT side of it, they certainly do need to have a very familiar and working level knowledge of 12-factor, because one of the aspects that I typically like to spend time with IT on is like, where are they in terms of DevOps mentality, and because when you're developing a cloud native application and you're going to be deploying it, and you're going to have these blue-green deployments where you add functionality and it's done in an automated way, and you have a build process through GitHub or any other repository, infrastructure has to meet those demands. I need to be able to add storage, change network security, evolve with the speed and agility that a cloud native application developer would be accustomed to meet them in that journey. Gone are the days where we say, hey, I need more storage, and a week or 6 weeks later, IT responds, right? Yeah. So that's where the 12-factor methodologies play a role for IT side when they start thinking, how am I going to deploy infrastructure as code?
Hey, Todd. Hey, question for you on this. I guess from over here in EMEA, we see a lot of customers who are, right, so containers are obviously the hot topic. DevOps, they understand the technology per se, but I guess where they're challenged is when they go there and why they go there, right? And you kind of touched on the why. So how do we prevent the kind of deploying new toys and they're sitting in the data center and use them properly? right?
Ah,
You see some customers that do it because they want to attract talent, for instance.
yeah.
But there's a balance there, right, in terms of we know the how, or we're beginning to understand the how, but the what, the when, and the why, I guess. So how do we address those challenges?
Right. There's a couple different approaches that I typically coach or look for in that space, which is typically around things like what's the use case that we're looking at? I mean, if it's initial, for a customer in EMEA or anywhere that they're just going down this path for the first time, and we're talking to IT, and then they're looking for that use case. I go back to a very consistent problem that I've run into, whether it's POCs or new technologies, which is understanding what the use case is, what the justification is, the success criteria, and what we're looking to accomplish, right? If it's really just
like the business side or use case from IT itself?
both. Are we talking to the application developers? Are we talking to the business? What problem do they have? Let's say it's a customer that they're having a problem with their catalog of services or product being available globally, but making sure that we have proximity for availability, right? It's a parts depot issue, for example, right? I have all my parts in North America, and I have people shopping in EMEA for them, and we need to be able to position product where the demand is, for example. So that's the problem that the business sees with their application. IT saying, well, we can deploy containers, blah, blah, they're starting to spin off all the nerd knob stuff without thinking about, well, how are we going to accomplish this? If it's a global company, how are we going to do it across all the different regions? Sure, we want to solve the problem in EMEA, but we're going to have a similar problem in North America, South America, APJ, et cetera, if we're a global company. So we want to build this application in a way that we have services that are constructed that can deliver an application in North America and deliver functionality we desire there, but also in EMEA and APJ for proximity type use case, for example, for a store catalog or what have you.
But it can't, this is the thing that I personally keep getting stuck on, right? When it comes to having the conversation around Kubernetes, containerization, even with things like Apex giving us a resource pool to just deploy cloud native on, a lot of it is build your own today, right? There's a lot of open source tools that are out there for people to use and consume that a lot of people kind of feel that, well, when you're going to containerization, it's just virtualization plus plus and sprinkle on open source, which clearly that's not the conversation, right? When it comes to the tooling around how a lot of both traditional shops and new shops are going to use it. Yes, Tanzu is a name. Yes, OpenShift is a name. But why do they matter? What do they actually bring to the table that kind of solve these problems that we're talking about?
Right. I mean, and that kind of ties into where Martin was going with where do we start with the customers, right? Which is, where are they today from an IT perspective? If we are talking to customers that are thinking, okay, we're going to do X percentage of stuff on-prem like we've always done, and we're a VMware shop through and through, and we have those skill sets, then they're going to naturally feel the value of the Tanzu portfolio, where I don't have to build everything. I don't have to do an open source networking for load balancing and for container to container security and things like that. I have to start thinking about, from an IT perspective, how am I going to maintain, control, and operate that environment? And if I can do it in native tooling that's familiar and has a robust set of APIs that developers can code into for infrastructure resources, for example, but an IT can secure that, whether it's on-prem or off-prem, because we start thinking, hey, I may have some use case where I need to consume services in Amazon or Azure or Google. If I have a native functionality and integration from the Tanzu portfolio and the VMware stack, that makes the lift on operations that much less, because they're going to be contending with, how do I do infrastructure as code? How do I deliver services? How do I secure it? Do I really need to figure out how do I, old IT guy, how do I pull the cables and plug it in and deal with power and keep the lights on? I need to worry about the higher level services. So when you look at a Tanzu portfolio, it brings that functionality where I can maintain, monitor, and operate, and the developers can get application services through the Tanzu application services and the Bitnami functionality and so forth to be able to bring a robust set of capabilities to the business.
It almost kind of sounds like, because I think we were talking about this the other day, it almost kind of sounds like in computer science, abstraction layers are king. And it's almost like a new level of abstraction, right? Like we were having this conversation the other day about why some people can't grasp the whys of like application transformation.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. So if like that application rationalization conversation we're having on the last episode is something we can bring into this mindset, right? Whereas rather than them just picking any legacy application and trying to fix the problem, they go experimental and small. Start with the principles and don't just treat like rationalization plus.
Yep. Yeah, I had a scenario with a customer that goes back a number of years ago, and the situation was such that they were a credit card processing company, right? So think about the cards you get from any department store or home improvement store out there. They're the back end engine that makes that stuff happen. And their application was a traditional, monolithic application built inside VMs, SQL database, and front end load balancer. So when people shopped or logged in and did their things, they would distribute it across the environment. The biggest problem they had was the reality that when they needed to scale during the holiday season, they had to figure out how to do this with virtual machines in these monolithic applications that didn't understand scaling very well. And so we took them through kind of a professional services type deal where we showed them the power of scaling their application to meet those demands, with the context being that there was a movement within the organization to build out an entire floor of developers to do peer programming and cloud native application development to transfer this monolithic application into a microservices, cloud native, all the buzzwords. But they couldn't get the buy-in from the business and from the developers and from operations to understand. So this small group was formed to help highlight how they could do that. So we built it, and we got through the holiday rush season. We said, now this is how we're going to do it. In cloud native speak, we can scale elements of that application once it's a microservice-based architecture, and we can do it based on load, not based on operations saying, hey, we have a problem.
Right. Yeah, right. It's waiting for the number red and 90%, 80%. It's actually what's happening.
Yes. Yep. So it's almost like, when sometimes when you're working in pre-sales, one of the fun things to share with folks is when they're trying to tell you something's going to be possible and it's more part of the possible. I'm more of a show me type mentality, right? Let's see it in action. Let's see a real use case that bears that fruit, right?
All right. So, any last questions before we kind of close out for today? Yeah. So next time we'll probably get more into why tools like Tanzu, OpenShift, and those operationalizing tools for these containerization technologies matter, right? Because at the end of the day, someone has to do monitoring, someone has to do the actual reporting on the container management. And if they just use the tools they're using today, they might find themselves overwhelmed. Now, that is a huge topic, and we'll get into it next time. But we appreciate joining.
You know what, Stephen? Can I ask one question before we close out? Now,
sure.
I've provided and listening.
No, sorry.
Everything that Todd had to say.
Done. Okay.
Right.
Go for it. It's time to go.
So, with everything that you talked about, is this the end of traditional virtualization, or are we going to have a hybrid type of approach? What do you see? What do you think?
So it's funny. I think a lot of people think about the technology as the thing that confers value as opposed to a way in which you work, right? Virtualization has been a way in which we've worked that has solved a lot of problems when it comes to scale of physical servers, too many ports, too many hard drives, too many failing parts. Containerization, however, and Todd, that's what I'm getting from Todd, is it's almost kind of trying to change the layer at which we're talking about the problem. We're no longer talking about servers and hardware and how to stuff VMs onto it. We're talking about applications and how to make sure the platforms they sit on makes sense, which is why something like Apex starts to make a lot more sense in that context.
Right. It certainly does, and it certainly drives to that utility model when your application is constructed in such a way to take advantage of it. But at the end of the day, no. I mean, the short answer is virtual machines are going to be around, for a long time into the future. We still have AS400 and COBOL programming needs out there, and there's reasons why they all serve a purpose and why they're still here. I think it's an evolution, that we're going to continue to see unfold, where there's going to be this, I hate to use the word hybrid because it's overutilized, but it is going to be a hybrid infrastructure where you do have VMs and you have a purpose for them, whether it's legacy applications or, it doesn't make sense to containerize something. And you're not going to develop everything into cloud native applications and take advantage of it. As we start to see off the shelf software evolve into containers, take advantage of it, then the industry may start tilting that direction. But until that really starts to hit its apex, again, no pun intended, we're going to see the utilization of VMs for quite some time.
Awesome. Well, Todd, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it, guys.
We'll see you guys next time. Cheers.
Yep.
All right.